Well, they had invited me to an event in New York, and I gave a presentation. And then Leah Ghali, his wife, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, invited me to do a presentation at the UN and on this issue, on taking weapons out of space, keeping space for peaceful exploration, making peaceful contact with ETs, and the whole UFO issue. Believe it or not, I did an actual presentation at the UN on all this. So she greets me at the front entrance of the UN, and she grabs me by the arm, and we're walking into the Great Hall, and all of you have been to the UN building, and we're going through this Great Hall, and I have my little daughter with me at the time, one of my 4 daughters, and she turns to me, and she says, and sort of hisses, she says, "When are you going to get this done?" And I said, excuse me? You know, I'm working full-time as an emergency doctor, taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks and all that stuff. And I'm up there doing this as a pro bono thing because I'm concerned about the state of the world. And she says, "We need you to get this information out." I said, "Leah, I'm just a country doctor from North Carolina." She says, "No, you must do it." I said, "Well, your husband is head of the world. He's the Secretary General of the UN." She looked at me with eyes wide open. She says, "No, it's too dangerous for Boutros. They'll kill Boutros." And I just stopped. I said, "Well, don't say this in front of my daughter. What is that? What am I, chopped liver?" And so, it was this hilarious scene that really someday should be in a movie. But there I am. And this is, as I began to have these meetings, I realized the amount of fear there is. And so fear is the mind killer and the spirit killer. And ultimately what we have to do is say, okay, enough of that nonsense. The consciousness that enables us to have the courage to speak truth to power is the Shambhala warrior state. And it's not a state of violence. It's a state of universal peace and actualization. And, before I was a medical doctor, I spent many years teaching people meditation and the Vedas and Sanskrit and through a mantra meditation approach. And what I found is that if you have the experience of universal consciousness, pure consciousness of enlightenment, you don't have any fear anymore. It's like people who've also had near-death experiences where they experience the fact that we are, in fact, eternal and omnipresent, and our innermost light of consciousness is this omnipresent field. Then what are you going to be afraid of? So, and I think this is the state of the fearless state that since we're on the World Puja show, that Krishna, when he was speaking to Arjuna on the battlefield and said, "A little of this eliminates all fear," and the "this" was a capital T, and he was referring to this state of higher enlightened consciousness where it goes and transcends your individuality and ego into that unbounded, pure state of mind that is the one mind of the cosmos. And that, to me, is the real meaning of this time, is that more and more people are not only going to know about that, but experience it, experientially realize it, which is what enlightenment is. And even the early physicist, the father of particle wave theories, Erwin Schrödinger, said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it is a singularity. And so the experience of that singularity creates the ability to stand up to someone at the CIA and say, this is nonsense, and you've had a nice ride for 50 or 60 years doing this. It's time to change. Now, a lot of people are kind of appalled when they hear this. And I said, no, I met with the head of Army Intelligence once, and he threatened me. I said, look, you get in my way, I'll see that you're in Leavenworth. Move. So you have to be, you cannot be a namby-pamby and take on these kind of interests. On the same time, it has to be coming from some higher state of consciousness. And so what we have to, I think this whole period that we're in right now is bringing heaven and earth together in the Chinese sense. We have to bring this enlightened state into actuality and action where we manifest a world that is we have glimpses of. I can see the future that awaits us. It's been forestalled, unfortunately, for longer than it should be, but it can definitely appear. And I think this is about bringing the people into that process, because the morphogenic field that Sheldrake talks about, the more people who come into this state of understanding, the more it potentiates it non-locally to people who don't even know it yet. So the nature of mind and consciousness and space and time is that it's a self-aware conscious universe. And so when people begin to realize this information, it really has an effect on folks globally and I think even interplanetarily. I always tell people this is not just an Earth phenomenon. This is a universal phenomenon. We're not in an Earth cycle. We're emerging into a universal cycle. And this is something not talked about since we tend to be self-centered. In reality, I think the period we're emerging into right now is not just a big transformative moment on Earth, but it's happening on multiple planets simultaneously, and it is a universal cycle.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you've inspired me with my allthingspeace.org is my 501c3, but you've inspired me because I've been concerned since the 70s. Back then I read a report from a think tank about how to extend the military-industrial complex. And in that report, they actually said, use war in the vernacular over and over again as a solution. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, and eventually introduce a war on terror because you can't prove a terror. And everyone's afraid of the lone assassin and the terrorist. But even that's going to get old. And this report said you have got to create a illusion of a war against aliens because the average person just has to take your word for it that they're being invaded from outer space. I read this in the 70s, and I watched everything unfold with the war on drugs and the war on poverty and then the war on terror. And now I see the Hollywood kicking up the story, which is really just it's controlling the message, it's controlling the thought process, which Hollywood and Madison Avenue and the like, they're very powerful and they're very good at what they do.
Right.
I was in a meeting in Madison Avenue where they said we are trendsetters, and they were bragging to each other. They said we're going to set a new trend. This was years ago. They said the trend's going to be body art and tattoos, and within 10 years. That became more than a fad. It became really, really popular, and they did it through controlling the message in every aspect of the media.
Right.
So I'm thinking we shouldn't be trying to achieve just a global peace or peace on Earth. It should be a galactic peace. It should be, universal peace, as you say.
Yeah, the galaxy's too small, by the way, because our group, if you go to cseti.org, has a photograph of a extraterrestrial being that visited us transdimensionally that actually appeared in a photograph a couple of years ago at Joshua Tree National Park, and he was from the Andromeda Galaxy, which is actually several million light years from our galaxy. It's the closest galaxy, and this was an actual contact. This is probably one of the most important photographs ever taken in history, and it was very real. And we had a group of people out in the desert using the remote viewing and consciousness protocols, and a sphere appeared, and then someone took a picture, and in this picture is this man waving at us, and he is clearly not human, but we later learned he told us mentally that he was from the Andromeda Galaxy. And so what you find, and we had all of our electronics were going nuts while this was happening, because we have electronic interface with these transdimensional teleportation systems that very advanced ETs use when they're zipping around like that. And what was fascinating about this contact experience is that I had just been talking that day to our training group, because I train people to make contact doing this, that in fact this is not just involving our galaxy, because someone kept talking about our galaxy and a galactic. I said, no. There are hundreds of billions of galaxies, of which the Milky Way, with our 100 billion star system, is only a speck. It's a relatively small and minor galaxy. The cosmos is unbelievably huge. But the nearby are twin. And in fact, what's interesting about the Andromeda Galaxy, it's almost the same size and shape with the same number of stars as the Milky Way. So they're sort of twin galaxies, which I think is beautiful. And so this particular ambassador who was sent to us was from Andromeda. And I know as far out as that sounds, we actually have a photograph of him. His name is Bijou. And And so this is the sort of thing that shocks people when they first hear about it. Are you kidding me? We're just now learning about the fact that UFOs have been kept secret, and you guys are out there virtually shaking hands with the ambassadors from the Andromeda Galaxy. And I said, well, time marches on. And, people are just now discovering what should have been known 100 years ago, but meanwhile, we're already 100 years into this new era. By the way, amongst many Vedic scholars, we're already in the early stages of this age of enlightenment and the ending of the Kali Yuga. And I think that if you look at the teachings from the Hopi, the Vedic teachings, certainly the Baha'is have this in their teachings and prophecy. If you look at the Buddhist teachings, there are many teachings that talk about this and a sort of the return. Now, of course, that gets turned into sort of a messianic return, but in reality, it's this greater sort of unveiling of a whole new cycle of development, the hallmark of which is enlightenment and universal peace, and the amazing developments of potential in terms of integration of our planet. I mean, 100 years ago, no one could have envisioned the kind of telecommunications you've worked on, Michael. And for that matter, most people who the idea that in 1954 these projects went black. I know the men who worked on them way back then, but we've had operational devices that would take us from here to Paris in a few seconds, fully operational. Since 1954. What's interesting, a lot of this anti-gravity research was in the open aerospace journal literature. Most of those journals have been snarfed up and burned or put away. And it all was being discussed fairly openly in the late 40s and early 50s. In October 1954, I'll give you that date, it all went black. And the reason it did is that we had enough breakthroughs that we actually developed operational devices that became part of a secret Air Force and Space Force, and those have been fully operational since then. Now, I wasn't born until 1955, but what's interesting is that when you look at the history of this, we're really about 50 or 60 years behind what people think we have, because everyone's sort of enthralled with, the space shuttle. Or I was just meeting with Richard Branson's person who is selling tickets on his little plane that goes to space and back for $200,000. Right. You can take a ride. And I just smiled and I said, yes, that's circa 1940s technology, just so you know. Everything since the 40s is in a black box, and they just looked at me in this astonished way. And then I went into this whole discussion of the work that we've done, as you can see at the OrionProject.org, unveiling the work of T. Townsend Brown and others that in the 1920s began doing high-voltage work electronically, causing mass cancellation and levitation, and that this was then developed even further by the 1940s and 50s, to the point now that these are fully operational systems. Unfortunately, the public simply doesn't know they exist. They're so-called black projects. But and again, the good news is that the science and technology is there. And one of the things that we're wanting to do, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Michael, is that this film, Sirius, we're hoping to create a public groundswell of activism so that we can fund a new energy laboratory to bring out these technologies in a safe manner in the coming months and years, because many times individual inventors have found the secret of how to get energy from the vacuum, so-called free energy devices, and they always disappear. I've watched this happen for 20 years. So we feel we have to create a